library security back in 2015. Prior to that, I've been doing my library security half-day workshop around the country. Started in California, where I was originally in San Diego, and now I'm in Colorado Springs. I just came back from Baltimore, and I was in Baltimore all this week doing programs in the Baltimore, Maryland area for Western Maryland Library Association. And before that, I've been in Atlanta, and before that, in Michigan as well. So I'm kind of going around the country talking about some of these issues that are concerning people a lot. I know some of the folks on this webinar today have the same concerns that I do. We'll talk about some things like the homeless. We'll talk about this new opiate epidemic, which is sweeping not only the country, but unfortunately libraries as well. In my 15+ years of doing this program, I've not seen the emphasis on Narcan use that we're now seeing, which I think is going to be a trend we're going to have to identify and to deal with, and also what we're going to do with the people that are overdosing in our libraries. So I've got my email down at the bottom there. Happy to take email questions from you if I don't get them from you and answer from you today. I always fall in love with the sound of my own voice, so it's easy sometimes to get distracted by what we're doing. I have an article that came out in the June ALA magazine, which is a library journal, and it's an interview about Narcan and opiates. And there's also a piece that I did for the American Libraries magazine, which also was in June, about the top 10 or so trends on library security, some of which we'll talk about here today. So thanks for your time and attention, and I appreciate Rail's opportunity to give me to speak to you today. So I'm a workplace violence prevention guy. I wrote the first book in the country on this subject back in 1994. This book was called Ticking Bombs. I interviewed a double murderer. It was about a guy who came in and shot and killed 2 people during a termination hearing. And certainly we have seen in the last 30 days or so 2 of the most significant and painful workplace violence incidents in this country: the church shooting in Sutherland Springs, Texas, a few days ago, and also the Las Vegas shooting in the first of the month in October, which killed a substantial number of people and really raised the bar for some of these perpetrators to want to increase the casualty count. We've not seen a lot of library shootings, but this one is particularly disturbing here, August 28th of this year. We've had this young man here who looks like a goofy 16-year-old kid that everybody sees in their community, went into the library with a gun that he got from his house from Clovis, New Mexico, library shooting. He killed the 2 library ladies we see here and wounded 4 others. We'll talk about the run, hide, fight process. I think that is a significant movement we need to make in libraries. I've been teaching the run, hide, fight concept using the Homeland Security, Department of Homeland Security 6-minute video. It's a partnership video with DHS and the city of Houston, Texas. It's on YouTube and easily accessed. I encourage you to watch the video. I think it's age appropriate for people in your house, maybe 14, 15-year-olds on above. You can show the video and talk about what you might do at church or the movies or the mall or other places where these rare possibilities of an active shooter may occur. We want to have a protocol that we want folks to follow, including our family members. So I've been teaching run, hide, fight for library people for many years now, and the concept says get out of the building, taking as many people, including patrons and co-workers, as you can to get out of the way of the bad guy. Hide out, break room, restroom, conference room, supervisor's office, training room, someplace to be while the police respond to these shooting incidents. And the third choice is to fight back using whatever we have at our disposal, including books and pots of coffee and sharp objects and whatever we have. These are not Navy SEALs that are doing these things. They're not trained commandos. These are just dipsticks with guns, and we can stop them. So we'll talk about this concept of the active shooter, which is rare in libraries, but again, we've seen this case in Clovis, New Mexico, and it certainly saddens me. This young gentleman here is looks like he brought something from Game of Thrones into the library in Pasadena, California. There's 2 security guards from Pasadena library that are trying to extract this Game of Thrones device from him. I'm guessing he didn't get this thing at Walmart. It looks pretty dangerous in the corner there if you see it. So we have mental illness, we have armed people coming into libraries, and this is certainly a concern. I'm a big fan of libraries that have good relationships with the police and good relationships with security, if that's a function, if they have it. If they don't have that as a function, no security officers or no pages or security assistants, then they need a good relationship with the local police or sheriff, and we'll talk about that as we go forward as well. If you look at this woman's feet here, you can see that they're blue, and that's a cyanotic, and this is somebody who is not drunk. I show this picture in my training, and I ask people, what do we think is wrong with her? And the answer that we get, of course, is opiate overdose. So here's a woman that's in respiratory arrest. She's preparing to, you know, either pass out and die, or at least pass out. She's in respiratory arrest. She needs Narcan. It's not drunk. Look at the color of her feet, how incapacitated she is. Same as this gentleman here. These people are not drunk. This is not sleepy. This is opiate narcosis. And so when we have opiate narcosis in our facilities, these people are on the path to at least, if not a paramedic call, but at least a possibility of death as well. So now we have, in our library culture, something I never thought I'd talk about with folks like you and me, is how do we train library people to give Narcan, which is an opiate antagonist. It removes the opiate that's in somebody's system. How do we train library people to do that? I'm in Colorado. We've had a death in the Denver library. In San Francisco, we had a death in the San Francisco Public Library. I was teaching the program in Santa Cruz, California, 2 months ago. We were upstairs on the second floor in the training room. We heard sirens and whatnot. We went downstairs. 31-year-old woman overdosed in the restroom. It took 3 shots of Narcan to bring her back to life. So Narcan is now being sold in pharmacies around the country with no prescription necessary. I think it's about $30. Some people who have opiate users in their family have started carrying Narcan because they're concerned about the overdose possibility. Just to give you a statistic, which is fairly startling to me, prescription medications for opiates in this country, we had in 2015 we had 256 million prescriptions written. That's not pills, that's prescriptions, and that's in 2015 we had 256 million. In 2016 we had 283 million prescriptions written. That's 1 prescription for almost every person in the United States. We've had a 400% increase in the number of overdose deaths for people in opiate overdoses in emergency rooms, a 400% increase in the use of opiates around this country in the past 5 years. So more people, and this is the first time in my lifetime that this has ever happened, more people are dying from drug overdoses due to opiates than in car accidents. That's never happened before. So where are we at in terms of this issue for library people? We're at a crossroads. We don't force library employees to go through Narcan training, but I would suggest that if it is a possibility that you have overdoses in your library, that we offer the training. Usually we can do it through the public health department in your community. The county public health agency can do it. I do it as part of an ALA program, which I'm going to start in February of next year. There's a video that you can get online. There's 2 or 3 videos that are pretty good. If you want to know what the links are, just send me an email and I'll send you the links to the videos. We're not forcing the library employees to do this, but we're at kind of a medical ethical crossroads, which says I don't want this person dying in my library, and I don't want that on my head. And I understand how library people are now taking up the Narcan use and giving it to these people who have overdosed. I'm not sure, and I asked this question in my training, I'm not sure why people use the library to take drugs. I get it, it's a private place. There's a chance that if they overdose that they'll be rescued. They don't have any place else to go because they're homeless. I get all that. I just don't understand the concept. Sort of like I don't understand why men look at pornography in the library and in public places as well. I understand what pornography is and I know how men are. I just don't see why they do it in the library, just like I don't see why people shoot up in the library. But we have that issue, and so now Narcan is part of a big trend that we're seeing where library staff members are saying, I at least want to know how to use this stuff if I ever have to give it to somebody who I find sprawled out in the restroom or in the stacks in my facilities. So that's a primary concern for us. I would say that's the first concern for security that I'm seeing that's risen to the top above the usual issues around mentally ill or the homeless that we oftentimes deal with. So I follow this person on Twitter. This is Fake Library Stats at Twitter. 48% of librarians celebrate Friday night by locking themselves in their bedroom so as to recover from another week of human interaction. Now, I get a big kick out of this because I'm an introvert trapped in an extrovert's job. A lot of people in library world, you may be an introvert trapped in an extrovert's job as well. We oftentimes think that library work is about books and periodicals, and it's really about people. And sometimes it's about high-risk people, and sometimes it's about challenging people, and sometimes it's about eccentric people. So this tweet, this makes me laugh because I think about all the introverts that I know in library world that have to turn it on and really become situational extroverts when dealing with folks in the library. So As I look at the trends that I see in library security around the country, these things, fortunately or unfortunately for us, these 5 trends here, we get to repeat forever. We need and want vigilant supervisors, vigilant employees, and vigilance on the part of our patrons, people who point out things that are happening to us inside and outside the library that we need to respond to, or we can call the police to respond to. Second point, and I put this in the library security book, in the appendix, there's a whole protocol, a whole checklist on how to do a facility security survey. How do you look at your facility sort of in the eyes of a crook? How would you break in, or how would you steal things, or what would you do to harm other people? Where are the places that we need to improve our facility security, especially around the concept of access control? And I think what happens is we oftentimes get religion about access control after there has been events. And I want to see a movement back in libraries to where we stop trading security for convenience. What happens here is people say, well, I always go through this door all the time. It's a hassle to use my key, so I'm just going to leave it open. And that's how people who don't need to get into our behind-the-scenes spaces get back there. That's how our backpacks and purses and wallets and things like that go missing, because we don't use the security we have. I'm a big fan of panic alarms at the reception desks and the checkout desks and circulation areas. I'm a fan of camera systems, especially in parts of the library where we typically have people gathering to do whatever. And I also want to think about how we can improve the access control so that we have key card access instead of hard keys, and we have people that use our key systems and lock systems and doors and things like that to keep themselves secure, so that we have 2 really distinct areas in the library. One is the patron side and the other is the employee side. And I think we need a good delineation between those 2. Third point, which is key to me as well, is code of conduct. A code of conduct in my perfect world would be seen from outer space. It would be poster size. You could see it from across the room. The code of conduct would be posted in every relevant room that we had in the library. And then we'd had a code of conduct which is not only created with input from staff, also blessed by the attorneys, your city attorney or your town attorney or county council, I get that, but really a conversation that comes from the staff and the leadership in staff meetings to say, how do we update our code of conduct on a regular basis? I've seen some of them that got updated back in '87 and are still up. How do we get a code of conduct that the people that work here have bought into and that can include things that are important to them? And how do we post that so that people see it and when they come into our facility? And then inside that concept of the code of conduct is the idea of firm, fair, consistent, and assertive library employees using the code of conduct to their advantage and not letting stuff go or happen on their watch. I talk about this in the training, which is if we enforce the code of conduct on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, but not so much on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, then the bad people, the creepos, the street people, homeless tend to come in on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday because they know there are no consequences for their behavior. So we want consistency. Monday through Sunday, we enforce the code of conduct the same. Firmly with everybody, fairly with everybody, consistently and assertively. The use of security incident reports, which is a big issue for me. Oftentimes I'm called by libraries to say, we need a restraining order against this patron. He physically assaulted somebody or assaulted staff or sexually exposed himself or did something like that. I say, great, let me see the reports. And they go, what? And I say, where are the security incident reports on this guy? And they go, we don't have any. And I go, why not? And they say, well, we use this Navajo, Hopi, Indian tradition of passing things down orally from generation to generation. We don't write stuff down. This is a mistake. We don't need to write down every single thing that happens in the library, but we need to capture certain events that are security or safety related, near misses, slip and falls, things that are broken in the facility, locks and things that need to be fixed, so we know what to address. With a security incident report in hand, over a span of time, I can take this to a judge or an attorney and say, here's the pattern of this person's behavior over the span of time. Here's why we need a restraining order. So I'm a big fan of security incident reports as well. Lastly, relationship with law enforcement. Somebody in your neighborhood has your building as their beat responsibility as a deputy or an officer, and we want that person to come by on a regular, irregular basis, meaning I'd like to see them twice in one day and then not again for 2 days or once a week and then come in 3 days in a row. Again, over a span of time, they have a irregular response so that the people in the library can't guess when the cops are going to be there. We want a relationship with law enforcement because I don't think they understand accurately what goes on in libraries. I was a cop for 15 years in San Diego. I didn't know what went on in the library until I started doing this type of training. We want to enforce with all employees or suggest to them that they are responsible for safety and security just like they're responsible for customer service. Every employee, every supervisor, our board members, some of you are on the line with me today, and I appreciate that. Our law enforcement partners and sheriff's department and police departments, even our patrons are helpful for us in the safety and security functions. We share in these responsibilities. It's not just somebody's job who's a cop or a security guard, it's everybody. We don't want employees to break up fights or chase people who steal stuff up the street, but we want them to be vigilant, to report, to intervene safely as necessary, and we'll talk about some of those protocols, but we want people to understand that safety and security is their function, just like good customer service is their function as well. So one of the things I talk about in my program is, can employees in the library protect themselves from dangerous people? And the answer is certainly they can, but I would rather have them disengaged than get in a big fight. You got two 19-year-olds with 20-inch biceps fighting in the library, you know, two high school football players. You don't go over and break up the fight. You got two 6-year-olds pulling hair, different story. But I want library people to protect themselves and to not put themselves into harm's way, and to say, I need to be a professional witness, sometimes from a distance. I can tell people to leave verbally. If that doesn't work, then I disengage. I can change the response to the situation by bringing over another employee, changing the ratios of confrontation, bringing over another supervisor, bringing over somebody else who may have better alignment or connection with that person. That may work, and if it doesn't, and it's a serious issue, we call the police. Working smart, knowing when to stay, when to go back to a safe place and lock the door and call the police. I teach code words in my program, which is Mr. Green or Dr. Brown or Dr. Blue or whatever color police uniforms they wear in town. It says go to a safe place, co-worker, and call the police and get them to come out here right away for the incident that's happening. Changing the ratios of confrontation, bringing over other people, including supervisors who sometimes can make things happen that the employee may not be able to do. Using space and distance appropriately, and using proxemic barriers. In my work, we talk about desks and counters and half shelves and carts and things we can put between scary, dangerous guy and the employee to be a bit of a barrier. Proxemic barriers work, and we have people that are cognizant of that. It can be helpful. And then the middle piece, stress and anger management. Really a key in library work is to not take it personally, not take the eccentricities or the mean comments or the insults from certain patrons personally. Do your job as a professional service provider, manage your stress and your anger so that you don't take it out on the other person, and that your professional response to the situation is always from a customer service perspective. So all these things together make up kind of a core concept of what we want employees to do to keep themselves safe in the facility. I hope that makes sense to you. So what we talk about in our discussion for code of conduct, posted, visible, input by the staff, and also updated on a regular basis, firm, fair, and consistent, with consistency being the key phrase there, and assertive approaches by staff, and then creative customer service skills. You know, if you can't eat in the library, don't go over and tell somebody you can't eat in the library. Say, boy, that sandwich looks terrific. I wish I could join you. You can't eat in the library. You see somebody sleeping in the library, you go, sir, you can't sleep in the library. You say, are you okay? Do you need an ambulance? Are you sick or anything? No, I'm not sick. I'm just sleeping. I'm glad you're not sick. You can't sleep in the library. So sometimes there's a lighter touch, a little bit more of a sense of humor, a little bit more of a sort of lighter approach to things, where we don't come over and read people the rule book. As you well know from your experience in life, people hate being told what to do. They hate being told what to do by people younger than them. We can come up with a lighter touch, a way to come up with a standard approach to certain types of library response situations, and do it in a way that doesn't insult or embarrass the patron, but also tries to get to compliance is what we're looking for. So some themes in our conversation. Am I into profiles or behaviors? I'm into behaviors. I don't care what people look like. I care about what they do. So I'm not into profiling people, even though I wrote a book about workplace violence profiles. I'm into behaviors. What do these people do, and what do they do that impacts or hurts our business? Am I into peace or justice in the library? It's peace. I want peace in the library. Another boring day is what we're looking for. Staff should be able to ask for help without feeling like they don't know how to do their job, or they're not very skilled as an employee. Asking for help should not be a sin in your work culture. Using the chain of command is not necessary in emergency situations. If my boss is on vacation, I don't need to call him or her to ask if it's okay to call the fire department if the building's on fire. We want employees to be empowered when it comes to calling police or paramedics or fire. How do we align with patrons? And this is a concept that says sometimes we just have a better fit with somebody based on age or race or gender or previous contact or previous experience, where you say, you know, this person seems to like me, hates your guts, I'll take care of it. Here she comes, doesn't seem to like me, seems to like you better, you handle it, right? Where we trade off, where we have a better sense of alignment. It could be based on age. We have younger staff members maybe connecting better with younger employees. We have older staff members maybe connecting better with younger employees or younger patrons. Sometimes I think about the value in libraries, and I put this in the book, of little old lady librarians. Little old lady librarians can do things that I can't do. I go over and tell a homeless guy to leave. He wants to fight me. Little old lady librarian comes over, looks like your saintly grandmother. She tells the guy to leave, and he says, yes, ma'am. He gathers up his stuff and he goes. That kind of alignment, I think, is very useful. If there are no consequences for this patron's behavior, then we know the rest is going to continue or it's going to escalate. I'm not turning our libraries into prison camps. I want people to have friendly access and enjoy the experience, but there have to be consequences for people who continually or repeatedly violate our code of conduct, because what we have, and I see this in libraries that I go to, about 5% of the people are highly problematic and the other 95% are not, and the 5% drive the staff crazy and they drive the library director crazy. So I know that talking to you, you probably have some of your favorite rogues gallery of folks that just come in and do all kinds of stuff in the library that is very difficult to deal with them. They steal, they threaten, they take drugs, they argue with people, they fight, there are all kinds of problems. And if there are no consequences for that behavior, then they run the library, and that's not what we want. Sometimes I tell staff members they need good acting skills. I want you to act more assertively. I want you to act more responsibly here in this situation, even though your intuition says I shouldn't walk over there because I'm afraid. Get help, change the ratios of confrontation, think about calling the police, but maybe you have to act a little bit more assertively than maybe you're perhaps comfortable in doing. Second to last there, do your job or do your job safely. Again, we want people to be safe. That's why we use the run, hide, fight concept for the active shooter. That's why we want employees to know that they can disengage as necessary. They don't have to stay with their feet glued to the floor and protect that piece of carpet or protect the counter. And the last one is, if we can measure certain events, we can manage them. If we know about things that happen on a regular basis of a safety and security nature, we can respond to them. That's why I like security incident reports. This is one of my favorite phrases in my training. In the history of calming down, has anyone ever calmed down by being told to calm down? The answer is no. This is one phrase that I tell people, if you take nothing from our time together today, stop saying calm down to people that are not calm. We talk about the value of venting and validation and how we can allow people to vent. And while we validate their concerns by saying empathic things like, I see, I understand, you could be right, tell me more about the situation, let me take some notes, sir, we can tend to get better responses. People want to be heard, especially when they're frustrated. So the concept of calming down has never worked, and it just makes the situation worse. So I use this as sort of a focal point to say, let people vent, validate their concerns, get help in dealing with them, but stop saying calm down. So here's kind of the collection of people that I have seen over my 15 years of doing this. Many of you have more time and experience in libraries certainly than I do. You've seen a lot of this yourself. I just did a big TV thing for Los Angeles NBC News in LA. They do it, I think it's a three-part, three-night thing on libraries, and I just did a big interview process with them where we talked about all these things here. They were showing photographs of people shooting up drugs in front of the library and sexual behavior in front of the library and stealing behavior in front of the library, and it was really disheartening. I have libraries in Los Angeles as my clients, and it's a big concern to me that we're not getting a better handle on the security issues out there. Entitled, angry, threatening, or eccentric patrons, certainly. Everybody in here has heard the phrase, I pay your salary, from somebody. Unruly teenagers, kids, I always talk about separating these kids and not talking to the whole group, talking to them one at a time. You tend to get better results. The big discussion in our world about service animals versus comfort animals, I think we've lost the war in some libraries. I know about the idea of you're only allowed to bring service dogs in, but now people are bringing their emotional comfort snakes and rats and weasels and parakeets and scorpions into the library. Stalking behaviors. It's ironic that patrons use our internet to stalk our employees. I talk to employees about reporting these things, especially now when we're talking about the concept of how sexual harassment is so prevalent in the news amongst all these movie stars and whatnot, that they have to tell us what's happening. If they're getting inappropriate comments or inappropriate behavior by patrons, we need to step in and address that, including by banning the patrons. Domestic violence, which comes to the library in two forms. One could be employees. The more women you have working for you, the more likelihood you have of domestic violence relationships in some of those employees. I was a DV detective for 6 years. I handled 1,500 cases in that time span. Most domestic violence victims work. The second category would be perpetrators that come into the library or victims. We may be able to talk to a victim separately, not around the perpetrator, and provide some shelter information or support information to that person. These are very volatile situations, and what I have seen now is, and this is disturbing to me, that judges are using the library or telling people to use the library as the drop-off point for their child custody issues. That's perfectly fine when everybody gets along, but sometimes, as you well know from seeing these stories, these are very volatile people in volatile situations, and the library becomes a focal point. Next thing you know, we have a shooting in the parking lot. Not what we want. Security and the police tend to be missing from libraries. The police don't respond until they're called. Again, I'd like a protocol where they come in on a regular basis, and we'll talk about that. Thieves. I see people in libraries that or library employees tell me that they unhook the book alarm because it goes off too often, which is always ironic to me. We unplug the security device because it makes too much noise. And so now we see a lot of material leaving the facility. And so I don't want folks chasing people up the street. But the parallel I use is if you go to a convenience store and you steal a case of beer or a carton of cigarettes, the convenience store people are told to call the police. The police show up and take a report. Now, it's not a huge dollar loss, and the police are not that excited about it, but it does enforce consequences, and it does say that we have a response to this for people who steal things from our facility. Certainly, homeless and mentally ill, and if we want to add the other leg to the tripod, homeless, mentally ill that are also substance abusers. 80% of that population of homeless has either a mental illness issue or a substance abuse issue. And again, we're seeing the offshoots of that where they're coming into the library in record numbers now because it's warm when it's cold outside and cool when it's hot outside, and their behavior can be problematic in terms of driving other folks away from using the library, and their behavior can be problematic with staff. We'll talk about that, what my response is, what one of my solutions is. Certainly, gang members go to the library to steal or to threaten or intimidate or to tag library materials or the walls or other things like that, or to sell drugs. That's an issue for the police to address as well. Internet hogs and creeps goes back to content versus time wasting. And again, in my perfect library world, we would have more of a sense of control over the content. I guess I'm kind of old school. I like filtering. I like privacy screens. I like dividers at the stations where people sit. I like to flip around the table so that the folks sit with their back to the wall and their content doesn't go out onto the open area like kids to see. What I typically come across is either we have libraries with a lot of filtering and a lot of control, and the staff is pretty vigilant about getting after people that bring up inappropriate content and even calling the police for what they suspect is child pornography. And then I have other libraries where they go, we don't do anything. There's First Amendment rights and the sky's the limit and they can do whatever they want. I lean towards the first one, but you have to make some judgments about what the culture of your library is and what your community will tolerate. One sort of downside that I heard, which I had not known, that sometimes when the police do investigations about child pornography, they will come in and seize the computer as evidence, and it'll be off you, so you won't be able to use it in your library for 6 months while they do some type of investigation. If that happens, that encourages staff not to want to call the police because they don't want to lose the asset. So I think we're at a crossroads for a couple issues on this list. One is the service animals versus emotional comfort animals. The other is how much filtering should we tolerate or allow for people to bring up content that's objectionable to other people in the library. And the last one, stinkers, stalkers, smokers, bathers, eaters, and sleepers. Those are all the names of my daughter's favorite punk rock bands. So we talked about the opiate users. I see vaping in the library now, so that may be a policy issue to address, vaping and marijuana. We see people wearing pseudo-religious clothing, soliciting for money in front of the library. We can ask them to leave. A library called me in upstate New York to tell me that a woman was blocking the entrance to the children's library doorway with her prayer rug, and I told her to tell her to move, and they were uncomfortable about doing that because they didn't want to cause an international incident, so we've seen that as well. And we see people that just interfere with the safe use of the library. Typically, homeless people bringing in bags and bags and bags and bags of stuff. And again, I have a process for that, which I'll talk about in just a second. Internet, skateboards, theft, misuse of the restrooms. Again, I want staff to go in and choose in the restroom, not by themselves, stand at the door and make an announcement to tell the folks that they have to leave if they're making a mess in the library. There's a phrase that I use all the time, two phrases actually, that I encourage staff to use. One phrase is you can't do that if you want to stay here, which allows the person a face-saving way out to make a value judgment about what they want to do. You can't do that if you want to stay here. And the second one is our insurance won't let you do that. And that's a great phrase because usually it's true. I work for a lot of insurance companies. They probably don't want what's happening in the library to happen. So those two phrases are what I use all the time in training. You can't do that if you want to stay here. Our insurance won't let you do that. Those typically have good results when we use them effectively. Certainly unattended kids that are left in the library by their alleged parents for 10, 12 hours. That's a child abuse issue. We consider calling the police there. sleeping, food and drink, if it's a policy concern. Electronic devices, people make a lot of noise with their electronic devices these days. What's your thumb drive policy? I'm concerned substantially about ransomware and some of the issues that we've seen where our IT system has been hacked. Some of you have had the hygiene conversation with a patron who could be anywhere from a homeless guy to a rich millionaire that doesn't like to take showers. It is a difficult issue to talk about. It's embarrassing and personal. But if you go back to our core theme, which is how does it impact the business? How do these things that we talked about, the last 3 slides here, how do these things hurt the business? Unattended belongings, people have an expectation that every library employee is going to watch their $600 cell phone, their $1,000 laptop, and sometimes that stuff gets stolen. It's a big mess. So we want to encourage patrons to take care of their own children and take care of their own stuff. So back to my core concept here. In my perfect library world, the code of conduct would be visible. I just saw one the other day, and it was 3 pages long and about 10-point type, too small to read. No one's going to look at that stuff. Boil the code of conduct down into two parts. One would be the longer version, which you can post on the internet and post in on clipboards and things like that, or leave copies laying around. That's fine. But put a top 10 version, which is cut down and makes sense in terms of the core concepts you're trying to talk about. Put that in visible poster-sized locations where people can walk around and see it. The reason for this, besides the fact that it just simply helps, is that patrons can't say, well, you're picking on me because of this or that. I'd say, nope. And the staff can point to it and say, it's just part of our policy. It's just part of my job to enforce this. I'm going to have to ask you to do more of this or less of that. I want the code of conduct to be written positively. Not, you can't eat in the library, but please enjoy your food and beverage outside. No phone calls in the library. Please take your cell calls outside. That type of thing, where we flip it around. It's written positively. It's written in plain English, not written by lawyers, but it's written by staff members, and it's vetted by your attorneys to make sense that it covers the legal issues that you want to cover. But these are the staff members that have to enforce these things. I want them to have input in what it says. So let's talk about our biggest issue for safety and security that I typically see in the library. It's been this way for all my 15 years of doing this. You may have extensive experience with the homeless. My thing is to create a task force. And my biggest success in this subject is when we get people from your county that are behavioral health specialists, that are substance abuse specialists, that are social workers, that they come together and say, let's talk with the library leadership about what we do, what services we can share, what things we can provide for you, what information or help or support we can provide. San Francisco Public, Los Angeles Public, several other places I go in California have social workers on site at the library. And so that makes sense based on the groups that they have to treat. Substance abuse professionals, adult and child protective services people, and then even folks that come from outside the library or system, like faith-based groups like St. Vincent de Paul or Salvation Army or Catholic Charities could be also very useful for homeless if they run shelters and things like that. Do we have grant-funded programs in your community that run homeless outreach and shelters, or substance abuse programs that are private? Can we get these people together in a group at the table, at the library, or at their facility and talk about in a broad-based meeting what we do collectively to work together to address the difficult issues in our culture and our communities and in our United States of the homeless, of the mentally ill, and of the substance abusers? When we look at these things, where we typically see the most success, it's more than just one meeting. Where I typically see this fall off the table is staff will get together in the library with these folks. They'll have one meeting. It's really great. That was in February. Never talk again. So there has to be a meeting in February, and then maybe another meeting in April, and another meeting in June, et cetera, et cetera. If we have one meeting, we make some good results. That's terrific, but it has to be a second meeting and a third meeting and a fourth and a fifth to get some of these things off of the drawing board and actually operational. So I hope that makes sense to you as a protocol when we deal with our most challenging patrons, which tend to be the homeless, mentally ill, and substance abusers. Let's talk about workplace violence and switch tracks here for a second. I talked about the Clovis, New Mexico shooting, which is a tremendous tragedy. We've had the Las Vegas massacre. We've had the shooting at the church. I've been working in workplace violence prevention since '92. I'm pessimistic about our success in that span of time. The cases seem to be getting worse and more horrific. I'm optimistic about our training and our protocols and our responses to these things to save lives, but I'm still pessimistic about the idea that there are people that are mentally ill that have access to guns that come into these facilities for whatever reasons they have, sometimes with no warning, and end up shooting our folks. So here's kind of a reality check for us. If you look at perpetrators of workplace violence per OSHA, the category that is the most prevalent is number 1, which is 50%. That's crooks, people that come in to rob the facility. That's good news. We don't have a lot of gold doubloons and diamonds and gems sitting on the library shelves. We're not getting a lot of people that are coming in to rob the library. So our biggest challenge in library work in terms of these categories is category 2, which is 25% of the problem, 20% is category 3, and 5% is category 4. Domestic violence involving an employee. Again, to go back to that, when do we discover one of our employees has a restraining order against her boyfriend, Crazy Larry? Is when he shows up at the facility. I encourage employees in my training programs, if you have a domestic violence issue, speak to your boss confidentially and say, here's what's happening, so we can figure out how to protect you. Oftentimes we discover this stuff when it's too late, or there's some kind of high-risk situation happening right in front of us. The reason employees don't tell is because A, they're embarrassed, but really B, primarily, they're afraid of being fired. So if they reveal that information, we're not going to fire them, and I think that's what the message has to be. Unfortunately, only 8 states in the United States have any kind of protocol on the books, laws on the books that say we cannot fire domestic violence victims for revealing that they are a domestic violence victim. I think the problem is employees are fearful of being terminated, so they won't say anything, because if they get fired, they have 2 problems: no job and same scary or bad boyfriend or ex-husband. So I want to be supportive in category 4. It says 5% is the number of cases, but I think it's widely underreported because employees are fearful about being fired. So our focus, category 2, dealing with the patron. So the Run, Hide, Fight video, I encourage you to watch it if you haven't seen it. It's 6 minutes long. It's not bloody. They got a guy that looks like Vin Diesel shooting people with a shotgun, bald-headed guy. You can tell he's a cop by how he walks around. It's a joint project with the City of Houston, Texas, and the Department of Homeland Security. They filmed it in 2012, just a couple weeks before the Aurora movie theater shootings. The guy with the red hair that shot all the folks there. I like the video. I think it's empowering. I don't think it frightens employees. I think employees have the right to know that they have some choices. First choice would be to run out of the building. Second choice, hide out. Break room, restroom, conference room, supervisor's office, training room, someplace to be where the bad guy is not. Third choice, fight back. When we look at these situations, again, there is a clock ticking inside the head of these perpetrators. It's about 5 to 8 minutes before they know the police will be there to engage, and they either shoot it out with the police or they kill themselves or the police kill them. So we want people out of the way and hidden and locked down, or out of the building, taking as many people as possible so they're not in direct contact with these people. That's how we survive these events. So we talk about running out of the building, taking as many people as possible, hiding out in break room, restroom, conference room, someplace we store the mops or the file folders or whatever. We fight back using whatever we have. In my perfect world, we have a 15-minute drill in your library once a year. The 15-minute drill would be 2 things: either run out of the building for 15 minutes, don't fall down and break your ankle, but run out of the building. Second would be hide out inside the building. When I'm doing the drill, the 15-minute drill once a year, and I walk through and I can't find you, you've done the drill correctly. If the doors I try to get into are locked or barricaded, if we can't lock them, there's tons of stuff placed in front of the door, then you've done the drill correctly. Come back after 15 minutes, go back to work, open up the library. Cover stops bullets, concealment hides people. I want people behind cover, brick walls, concrete, steel, things like that. Concealment is windows that are not tinted and with blinds, stuff like that. I want people behind cover. That's how they survive these events. This was a shooting at the happened at Ohio State University involving an active shooter. He actually used a car and a knife. He was shot and killed by the Ohio State campus police. These are all the folks here that barricaded the doors in the building that he was in front of. I know it looks like an art exhibit, but that's a pretty clever way to keep this guy out. These perpetrators are not going to push through these doors. They're not going to shove all these chairs away to come inside the facility. So if we can get these doors, if we can't lock them, if we can at least barricade them, keep people away from the fatal funnel, they're going to survive these events. We look at other things that happen in the library from a safety perspective. I also want to commend, besides the opiate conversation for Narcan, that I'm a big believer in the first aid training for everybody, including CPR, including infant or child CPR. And also, I like the idea of training employees to use the AEDs. I guess, my perception is, because I come from a world of risk management, that if every employee is not trained in the use of an AED, and we have an AED in the facility and someone has a heart attack and the employees stand around because they don't know how to use the AED, I don't know if we're going to get sued successfully, but it doesn't look good. So my philosophy in training is, if we have an AED, train everybody to use it and get a hold of the American Heart Association or the Red Cross and have them come in and give everybody CPR and AED training. Second, fires in our facility. How do we protect some of our more older buildings, and do we have fire drills? And I know the fire marshal comes through and does an inspection once a year, things like that, but do we have an actual fire drill? Do we actually encourage people to think about what they would do under stress? That's the value of the run, hide, fight concept in protecting against active shooters. People respond under stress how they have been trained. If they haven't had a fire drill, if they haven't had a run, hide, fight drill, then they may not respond correctly. A couple examples in that. In some phone systems in your library, you may have to dial 9 first to get an outside line, then 911. I've seen phone systems that if you dial 911, you get extension 11. Not what we want. So just training people to use 9 first, then 911 is a big training issue. Second, under stress, people may use their cell phones, which are ubiquitous and on their, within 2 feet of them all the time, 24/7. If they dial 911 on their cell phone, who answers? I think that's an important security question to ask in your facility. When I was in California, the highway patrol, the state highway patrol, answered all 911 calls. And so if it was a 911 from a landline, then that went to the sheriff's or the fire dispatch or the police dispatch in that community. If it was a 911 call on a cell phone, it went to the CHP or the highway patrol. So in your location, does it ring to your dispatch, which is down the street? Does it ring at the state police headquarters? Where does it ring? I think that's an important training issue as well. Earthquakes, tornadoes, weather incidents. My daughter lives in Miami, so I've had the evacuation thing with her based on the hurricane stuff. That was very stressful. Gas leaks, chemical spills. I would throw in emergency situation as not necessarily emergency, but as tedious would be bed bugs. So we've seen a lot of issues in libraries about that, where they have to have fumigation and whatnot. And then the other emergency, which doesn't tend to rear its ugly head until it does, is plumbing issues and things related to how we protect old pipes and things like that. So is it flooding from rains, or is it hurricanes, or flooding because we had old pipes? So those are all emergency situations that you have to have a protocol for. What I typically see in libraries is that we may have a conversation about evacuation, but no one remembers the last time we did a drill. We may have a conversation about having floor wardens or a person in charge make sure we get patrons and staff members out. We may have a protocol that we have on paper about how we search the facility and make sure that people are out of the restrooms and the stacks and everything, especially if you have a multi-floor location. But those things aren't actually practiced. My argument is that we typically respond to how we have been trained. If we don't practice these things, there's going to be a lot of chaos. And so in emergency situations, we want staff to be vigilant. We want staff to be assertive. We want staff to fall back on their training. So whether it's active shooter, 15-minute drill, or earthquake or tornado, or any kind of other weather drill, fire drill, do those things more often than you're doing them now. Because my guess is if you have new employees or you have folks that don't recall the last time we've done these, it's probably because we haven't done one. So as we wrap up, and I'm interested in your questions and anything that I can't answer here, I'll answer by email. I'm happy to take those. We agree that we can't pick our customers. We can't always fire our customers. We have kind of a trap relationship. They come to our library. We're a community service. We're a public building for them. But we do enforce our policy as the shepherds of those buildings. So I use that term not in a religious way or a biblical way. I just say we are supposed to protect these buildings. So we enforce our policies to create a culture of safety and security for everybody. Because here's the problem, and you know this. When people don't feel safe at the library in the old days, maybe they wrote a letter to their mayor or said something to somebody at breakfast, but now we see people put the library isn't safe on their Yelp accounts and on their Facebook accounts, and they use social media to complain about certain things about safety in the library, and that's something we want to address before we get a groundswell of people going, hey, it's not safe to use this facility, and as a result, it impacts our business in a negative way. Every employee is in charge of safety and security, just like they're in charge of customer service. I don't want them getting in fights. I don't want them making arrests. I don't want them chasing people up the street to steal stuff. I want them to be a professional witness, be able to observe what they see and tell the police and tell their boss and tell any security officers that we have on site what's going on. We want them to be vigilant. We want them to be assertive. We want them to be able to align with certain patrons based on age or race or gender or previous contact where they get good results and a better connection maybe than a colleague would have. We want to encourage them to use acting skills, to be assertive, and to be more perhaps extroverted than they typically are. I would always encourage every library to train their folks in some version of what's called verbal judo. Verbal judo is high-risk customer service skills. The concept originally came from a guy named George Thompson, who wrote a book called Verbal Judo, which I think came out in about '96. He went around the country teaching this concept, which is how do we deal with high stress, high risk, angry, entitled, threatening people who don't want to hear calm down over the phone, face to face, over the counter, and what's the protocol that we have for that. So I encourage folks to read the Verbal Judo book. I like that book a lot as a supplemental training guide for employees. There's also a book I recommend that was written by security expert for the Hollywood movie stars, a guy named Gavin DeBecker, D-E, big B-E-C-K-E-R. Gavin DeBecker wrote a book called The Gift of Fear. The Gift of Fear is a great book because it talks about intuition. Women find that book very empowering. DeBecker is Oprah's security guy and knows everything about protecting Hollywood people. So the book, The Gift of Fear, is also a good companion to the Verbal Judo concept. I encourage you to use role plays during staff meetings to create a uniform response to different patron issues and security situations. When I do the training program, I have about 8 role plays that I have the folks do at the end of the day. So in about the last 40 minutes or so, they do role plays with each other. I just walk around and look at them and kind of give them some support and empowering, praise and things like that when they do the right things. I think role plays are useful because staff gets in the habit of practicing what they want to say that works in the real world when dealing with certain types of patron issues. The biggest thing from especially your leadership level is to assess the impact on the business. Somebody sleeping in the library, I don't care. The guy sleeping on top of a table in the library, naked, covered with the New York Times, I care. When I look at business impact, I'm always trying to look at the sense of the sliding scale between how much we will tolerate because it hurts the business versus that's just an eccentric guy. We can't fix everybody, can't fix everything, but I look at the business impact as why I want staff or leadership to get involved in certain patron behavior situations. We've talked until you're sick of hearing it about the power of the code of conduct that's posted and visible. We want staff to stay firm, fair, consistent, and assertive. And the biggest one for me, again, is consistency of message, consistency of approach. If they feel uncomfortable doing it by themselves, then they partner up with a coworker, or they get a boss to come over. I don't want employees to run to mom and dad all the time and get a supervisor for every single thing, but supervisors should be ready to come over and say the exact same thing the employee just said, because sometimes the patron wants to hear it from a boss. Many years ago when I started this program, I used the concept of the difficult employee. That was the way it was a difficult patron, Freudian slip there. The difficult patron was the way it was sort of, explained to me that these people are difficult. And that was my concept for patrons for a long time. Somebody in the library world said to me, can we switch over to the idea of the person being challenging instead of difficult? It's a more positive approach. It could be somebody who's got developmental or disabled. It could be somebody who's got Alzheimer's. They're not necessarily difficult, they're just challenging, and they're right. So I use the phrase challenging when I talk about patrons, and I think sometimes we need to change our vocabulary to say, here's who we're dealing with, but they're not all dangerous, they're not all threatening, they're not all problematic, they just can be challenging for our staff. So let's change that vocabulary. Lastly, again, what I talked about, ongoing relationships with the police. Call the watch commander in your police area and say, who has our beat responsibility? Who has this building, my library, as part of their beat responsibility as a deputy or an officer? Have that person come over. We'd like to introduce ourselves, take a tour of the facility. Here's a little secret message. Cops want a private restroom. So if you say to them, hey, anytime you want to come in and use the staff bathroom, they're like very excited. Because when I had 35 pounds of gear on in patrol, I wanted to use the private bathroom so I felt safe when I was going potty. So if you can do that, it's not coffee and donuts that attracts them, it's a private restroom. Mental health services, social workers, homeless advocacy groups, substance abuse, people in public and private sector, get together as a group and talk about who are your biggest challenges and continue those messages on as often basis as you can to continue to move forward with the ideas that you're coming up with. We want staff to come up with common answers, to creative common answers to common patron behavioral situations. And it's okay to tell staff, I believe, that it's okay to say no to patrons. It's okay to say, I can't do that for you. It's okay to say I have to move on to another person. It's okay to say I have to go do another part of my job. I talk to a lot of female staff members who are intimidated by certain male patrons who are aggressive and threatening and sort of, have this kind of inappropriate flirting behavior or personal comments to them, and they don't feel like they can disengage. And I think, especially at a leadership level, we tell our employees that they have the right to balance good service with saying, enough, I've given this person enough help, I have to move on. And we want supervisors to step in and give patrons warnings about their inappropriate boundaries, comments, or conduct. Security incident reports. Critical, again, I think, for us to make decisions about things like restraining orders or banning people. Security incident reports tell us what needs to be fixed, door locks, things that relate to IT issues, things that relate to access control. All those things need to be documented in a way that if we have to go to our our attorneys or have to go to our board of supervisors or city council or library boards, we can say here is a collection of these reports that point out the significance of these issues that we are facing. It makes it easier for those groups to make decisions as to what to do. I'm a big fan of the verbal restraining order. We don't necessarily get a physical one, but we say you're out for a week, you can't come in for 30 days. It's amazing to me, especially with these homeless guys, how they respond and go, okay, and they stand outside and go, 3 more days before I can come in, Mrs. Jones? And you go, yep, 3 more days. And they come back in and they're a little bit more compliant. And I'm amazed that it works, but I like the verbal restraining order. Lighter touch, a little bit of humor. You can always get tougher. You can always break out the rule book or the code of conduct. I think having a lighter touch makes it easier for folks to sort of step up if they need to get tougher, but it's hard to go back down if you've started off, bashing them over the head with a code of conduct. And the last one is to be courageous. We want staff members to have the courage not to put themselves in harm's way, but to do good things on behalf of the facility, to protect themselves, protect the patrons, to protect our assets. Joe, I think I'm back over to you for questions or comments.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, Steve. We'll let you take 30 seconds here to catch your breath. We've got 6-7 minutes for questions, and we do have some that have come in, so we will just roll through them. But as Steve mentioned, he has his email address there at the bottom. So if you don't hear your question asked, feel free to reach out to him. So going back to the incident report, Steve, for those libraries out there, that basically have a notebook and staff will just kind of in free form write down the incident. But the library maybe wants to explore creating a more systematic document. What are the most important elements to include in that incident report, would you say?
So if you look at who's going to read the incident report, it could be attorneys, it could be insurance adjusters, it could be risk managers, it could be elected officials, it could be library boards. I think they want to see the same thing, which is date, time, the description of the incident. How would we categorize the incident? Is it a safety concern? Is it a security concern? Is it a violence concern? Is it a patron behavior concern, which one might need the police? And then really what happened? So what's the narrative? And I think it's important for staff to know that these things exist, because what happens is if somebody comes in and gets arrested on a Monday and you weren't working, and then you're working Tuesday and nobody says anything, and then here comes the guy fresh out of jail, you go, hi sir, it starts all over again. Staff needs to know what went on. So these things can be posted or discussed before people go out into the workday if it's a significant issue. So I'm looking for date, time, description, and also a little backstory, a little background. How many times has this event happened with this same person? This is the 15th time we've addressed this, or this is the first time we've addressed this. I think that's important as well.
Okay, thank you. So regarding staff training, there are some libraries that will devote half a day or even a full day training on active shooter. Is that something in that amount of time, do you feel appropriate, or is it better to maybe spend less time in that, but then also covering a lot of the other things in that library that could potentially happen?
I think half day is way too long for active shooter. I don't want employees afraid to come to work. I mean, I think we can cover the subject in I do it in 90 minutes. I mean, 2 hours would be more than sufficient. If we talk about the run, hide, fight video, we show it. Oftentimes the people that do a good job on the run, hide, fight training is the local police department or sheriff's department. They oftentimes have, deputies or officers that are good trainers, have the gift of gab. They can come in and do it. But I would think, an hour at the minimum, and 2 hours at the max. I think too much and frightens employees. I don't want to go overboard and make them not want to come to work.
Sure. Okay. Another question. I guess this is from the perspective of police or dispatchers. If you dial 911 from your cell phone, can they? Is there a way for them to tell where you are?
Yeah, the issue there is, depending upon the technology that they use and how sophisticated your cell phone is, the answer is probably yes. So we have this, geo positioning, locating thing in a lot of cell phones that they can tell within about 150 feet of where you are. So if you have the only choice is cell phones, then certainly use that. But I like the landline because even if you leave the phone off the hook, it'll show the address of where they need to dispatch people.
Sure. This is a good question that I think I've heard before. Library staff are notoriously service-oriented. Do you have any suggestions or way to frame or reinforce the idea that in an active shooter, active threat situation, for staff, their first priority is to keep themselves safe?
I say this a lot in the training, and it's exactly what you just said. I said your first responsibility is to you. Take care of yourself first, take care of your coworkers second, take care of the patrons third. And here's the metaphor I use. When the lifeguards start drowning at the beach, we have a problem. If you're a lifeguard, you can't drown. So you've got to take care of yourself first. You can't drown. Second, you take care of your coworkers. They have to be safe as well. Both of you can't do anything unless you're safe to help the patron. So it's first you, second coworkers, third patrons. I try to drill that into their heads so that they understand that they are valuable as a resource to keep people safe, but they have to take care of themselves first.
Got it. And going back to that 911 question, I realized that I had kind of misphrased the question. What this person meant was when they dial 911 from a cell phone, is there a way for them to know which dispatch is actually answering? Is there anything there that they can do to tell?
I think they have to look that up, like on Google or something, because I'm not exactly sure, because I hear a sort of a mixed message all across the country. Some people go, well, this rings to the county and this rings to the dispatch, which is next door in our police station. If you're in a library where City Hall is near the PD and all that. So I don't really know. I think you have to ask amongst everybody and find out what the protocol is, and then talk to the cops and say, what number are we supposed to dial? If we're using our cell phones, who's going to respond and where are they coming from? Because it may be better to use a landline.
Okay. Just one or two more questions here until we are at 10:30. Any suggestions, Steve, on how, particularly in a smaller medium library, how to deal with any issues when patrons do not speak English and there just isn't anyone on staff who speaks other languages, and how to work with that situation?
Yeah, I think it's a couple things. One is we tend to shout at people or add IE or O onto everything. No parking there, oh, sir, oh, that kind of stuff. Stop shouting at them. The second is Google Translate seems to be pretty effective. You can just put it on your cell phone or slide the screen over. If you can find somebody that's oftentimes bilingual with that person, could be a little kid or it could be another person that could be nearby, or you could simply say, does anybody speak this language? I think that helps lower the emotional temperature. But Google Translate seems to be the method I've seen people use effectively.
Mm-hmm. And maybe last question here. Apart from your bathroom tip, which I think was excellent, how would you go about asking law enforcement to maybe walk the library every so often, or even doing safety checks? I think for a lot of libraries, this would just kind of solidify safety and make people perhaps feel more at ease. Any other tips you might share?
Yeah, I mean, if you have the opportunity to meet with the beat deputy or the beat officer that has your facility, I would show them the security incident reports and say, here's what we're dealing with. They may know some of these cast of characters. They may have frequent flyer miles on some of those guys and know who they are. So I think you go from a position of data and say, here's what we're dealing with, and that's why we could really use your help. And just say to them, we don't expect you to park in front of the building all day, but can you walk through or drive the parking lot on an irregular basis, just so that people feel comfortable seeing you around here. And also, if you come in once in a while and talk to us, we can tell you some things that you may want to know about what's going on in the neighborhood.
Okay. All right, and that takes us to 10:30. I do just want to respond to one other couple questions that came up in the questions about sample policies or procedures. I do want to make sure everyone's aware that on the Rails website, if you go to the top under believe it's under members. Yes, under members on the right-hand side, you will see a link to policies, procedures, and plans. And that's just kind of a depository in which libraries have uploaded their sample policies and procedures to share with others. And just looking through it, I do see some examples of, behavior expectations, patron behavior policy, rules of conduct. So that may be a good place for inspiration and for examples of how other libraries are doing this. With that, Steve, I want to thank you for your time and a lot of good information today, and want to thank all of you for participating in today's webinar. Just a reminder that I know several of you said you'd like to show this to your staff, perhaps other trustees. We will have that recording available by Friday, and we will email everyone when it is ready on the Continuing Education Archives page. So once again, Steve, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Joe. Take care, everybody.
All right. And for everybody, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for attending. Bye now.